Korihor is supposed to be a villain from 74 BCE in the Book of Mormon, but he talks like a skeptic from the 1700s. In Alma chapter 30, the Book of Mormon presents him as an antichrist who mocks prophecy, demands evidence, and calls out priestcraft as a tool of control. But his arguments don't sound like anything from ancient America or even classical thought. They echo the rationalist, empiricist, and anti-clerical critiques of the Enlightenment, including thinkers like, Voltaire, Paine, and Hume. Korihor is not an ancient heretic. He's a mouthpiece for 18th century ideas, projected backwards into the fictional past. His story is less a historical account than a reflection of Joseph Smith's 19th century environment, shaped by American Christian anxieties about reason, atheism, and religious authority. This connection becomes even more compelling when viewed in light of Joseph Smith's family background. His paternal grandfather, Asel Smith, was an admirer of Thomas Paine and reportedly gave the Age of Reason to his children, including Joseph Smith Sr., stating that the world would yet acknowledge Paine as one of its greatest benefactors. Paine's deist critique of institutional religion, divine revelation, and priestcraft would have been part of the intellectual atmosphere surrounding Joseph Smith's upbringing. It is entirely plausible that the Age of Reason, with its calls for reason over superstition, directly or indirectly influenced the construction of Korihor's arguments. Korihor's core claims here are that religious leaders exploit believers for power and wealth, that there is no empirical evidence for the existence of God, and that morality, well, it's a human construct. These ideas align closely with the writings of the Enlightenment figures such as Voltaire, David Hume, and Thomas Paine. Korihor declares that no man can know of anything which is to come, and that religious prophecy stems from a frenzied mind. This echoes Hume's critique of miracles as violations of natural law for which human testimony is entirely insufficient. Like Voltaire, who condemned the Catholic clergy's manipulation of the masses, Korihor accuses the Nephite priests of using religion to usurp power and authority over the people and keep them in ignorance. Korihor's demand for empirical evidence, if thou wilt show me a sign, reflects Enlightenment empiricism. His deterministic view that every man prospers according to his genius and that death is the end of existence, well, that mirrors the deistic and materialistic views expressed by Paine in The Age of Reason and by Baron d'Holbach in The System of Nature. These ideas were widespread in early America, especially after the American Revolution, when skepticism towards organized religion was gaining traction. Korihor's story carries a sharp irony when viewed through the lens of the Latter-day Saint doctrine. In Alma chapter 35, he rebukes the Nephite belief that people are fallen because of Adam. And here's what he said.
Ye say that this people is a guilty and a fallen people because of the transgression of a parent. Behold, I say that a child is not guilty because of its parents.
Yet this principle, that individuals are not punished for inherited sin, is precisely what Article of Faith number 2 affirms.
We believe that men will be punished for their own sins, and not for Adam's transgression.
Korihor is condemned as a heretic for voicing what would later become official church doctrine. Korihor also accuses Alma and other religious leaders of using their positions for personal gain. Alma responds defensively, insisting that he's labored with his own hands and has never received so much as one C9 for his religious service. This detail is meant to distinguish the righteous Nephite priesthood from the corrupt clergy. However, in contrast, modern LDS leaders do receive financial compensation, despite decades of rhetoric suggesting otherwise. It was only after Mormon WikiLeaks published leaked pay stubs in 2017 that the church confirmed that the general authorities receive what they call a modest living allowance. Critics have noted that this framing, using terms like stipend or living wage rather than salary, functions as a rhetorical strategy to downplay institutional wealth and avoid acknowledging the very priestcraft Korihor was warning us all about. In addition, Korihor is not only struck dumb for asking legitimate questions about prophecy, evidence, and authority, he is later trampled to death. The text does not present him as guilty of any violence or fraud. He is simply punished for expressing skepticism. His fate feels less like divine justice and more like a warning against supposed iniquity. What makes the entire ending even more puzzling is Korihor's final confession. After being struck dumb, he does not claim he was mistaken or persuaded by Alma's arguments. Instead, he says that the devil appeared to him in the form of an angel and told him what to preach. This reversal is inconsistent with the worldview that he defended. A strict materialist would not believe in a literal devil. An Enlightenment skeptic would not renounce reason by affirming supernatural natural evil. Korihor is introduced as a rationalist, but ends his story behaving like a guilty apostate who always knew the truth. His confession only makes sense within the religious framework that he supposedly rejected. This contradiction reveals the literary purpose of Korihor's character. He is not a consistent philosophical skeptic. He is a rhetorical straw man, created to voice secular ideas and then be supernaturally destroyed. The text does not refute unbelief through reasoned argument, it condemns it through divine punishment. Korihor reflects 19th century fears about rising secularism repackaged in ancient clothing. His story tells readers that skepticism leads not to intellectual discovery, but to ruin. Alma chapter 30 explicitly claims that Nephite law protected religious freedom, stating that there was no law against a man's belief. Yet Korihor is arrested, bound, and shuffled between cities solely for preaching unpopular ideas. The story attempts to justify this by citing regional legal differences, but the contradiction remains. Korihor is punished for violating a principle the text claims is legally protected. After Korihor is struck mute, the text indicates that he can still see and hear, yet Alma communicates with him by writing in the dirt rather than simply speaking. This is a strange choice, suggesting either a narrative oversight or a confusion between muteness and deafness. Finally, Korihor is brought before Alma, who, according to earlier chapters, held dual roles as both high priest and chief judge.
Now it was in the law of Mosiah that every man who was a judge of the law, or those who were appointed to be judges, should receive wages according to the time which they labored, to judge those who were brought before them to be judged.
This implies a centralized theocratic judiciary and a salaried system of governance funded through taxation, something for which there is no archaeological or historical evidence in pre-classical Mesoamerica. The entire structure reflects a 19th century American understanding of church-state authority, not the ancient Americas. Korihor's argument in the Book of Mormon sounds far more like 18th century Enlightenment philosophy than anything from ancient America. His critiques of religion mirror the writings of thinkers like Paine, Hume, and Voltaire. Ironically, some of his heretical beliefs later became LDS doctrine. The story punishes him not through logic, but through divine force, ending with a bizarre confession about the devil that contradicts everything that he stood for. Korihor wasn't a real skeptic. He was a straw man who was built to be absolutely crushed.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.